welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. Before we get to our topic today, I just want to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. Innovation has always been the key to success of Pepperball, and the Pepperball Blast is just one more way to deliver a payload that will distract, disorient, or incapacitate an inmate. This lightweight, refillable delivery system is perfect for carrying in a holster, in your pocket, or just holding in your hand as part of a cell entry team or a CERT team. Each reloadable blast cartridge contains up to 3 projectiles worth of PAVA powder. When the quick flip safety is turned and depressed, the PAVA powder is pushed out of the tube by a 1.8 gram nitrogen cartridge. This will quickly cover the inmate and saturate the cell. Since there's no actual projectiles deployed upon firing, this is a truly non-lethal product with no impact. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click on the show notes today for more information. Pepperball is the safer option first. Oh, okay. Perfect. Okay, welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name's Mike Cantrell. Today I get to interview not only a exciting guest, but also an old friend. So I'm looking forward. We haven't got sat down in several years together and talk. So I'm looking forward to talking to him and having this conversation about what he's seen, where he's been. Steve Hansen. He's a retired special investigative agent for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He's got over 25 years of experience at various security levels and different supervisory positions. He currently works security overseas, and we'll see how much of that he can talk about and hear about what life after corrections is like. He's a good friend of mine, and it's a pleasure to have him on the podcast. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I'm excited not only to share some of your stories with people, but we worked together for several years, and I miss sitting down, and we used to talk a lot. So I'm excited about having you on here.
Very excited.
So I know you've listened, but I always start off the same way. I like to hear about where people came from. So if you could tell us, tell me about where you grew up, what that was like in school and stuff before you took that jump off into, I know you went in the military. So where did you grow up at?
I grew up in a small town in Iowa called Palo, Iowa. I graduated from Cedar Rapids Kennedy in 1986. I was going to go to the University of Iowa, had enrolled, knew where I was going to live and all that stuff. And then I ended up being diverted into the Air Force. Basically, one of my friends asked me to go to the Air Force recruiter with him. We both went. He decided not to go, and then I ended up going. So that was kind of ironic. My first assignment was Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. And I did a year there. And I went to Comiso, Sicily, where I met my ex-wife. And we had a child. So then I got sent back to Vandenberg. The marriage fell apart, divorced. So when I got out of the military, the initial thing was I was going to use my GI Bill. But I had a kid to support, so that's how I ended up in corrections. It was right after Desert Storm. The job opportunities were not there. However, the United States Penitentiary, Lompoc, California, was hiring. So that's how I started off my career.
Yeah. So what was your MOS when you were in the Air Force?
I was a security specialist.
Okay, so you were doing law enforcement type stuff then?
Absolutely. We were guarding the missile bases.
Ah, okay. So a lot of security. Yeah. Were you dealing with any corrections? Did you see corrections at that level while you were in the Air Force?
I did not. I did not. Strictly cop out in the missile fields.
Okay. So did you know about corrections before you apparently saw that Lompoc was hiring? Was there anything that led up to that? Did you know anybody that worked in corrections?
To be honest, the way I got interested in it was I got stop lossed. Basically, during Desert Storm, I got extended 9 months. And during that 9 months, I was taking college courses. And it was all law enforcement related, of course. and one of the recruiters from the prison came and talked to our class, and he brought out all the cool box of shanks and was telling us all the war stories, and I thought that was pretty cool. So
yeah. So, how quickly did you get hired and picked up at Lompoc?
Oh, I got out in August, and then I started November of '91. So
Oh, wow.
I was unemployed for like 2 months. So
Yeah.
there was like three of us that all got stop loss together. We all started around the same time. So
am I thinking of the
only
right?
two of us made it out of a career, though.
Was Lompoc fairly new in the 80s? Or am I thinking of a different California
No,
pen?
no.
Lompoc's the old one.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Lompoc's been around since the 1950s. So
Okay. So let's settle this right here because I've been around the Bureau for years.
okay,
Is it Lompoc or is it Lompoc?
the locals pronounce it Lompoc.
Okay. I usually say that wrong, and some people take a lot of offense to that,
Yeah.
and then others, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, we'll put that out there for everybody. It is Lompoc.
Yep.
Okay. Lompoc. Okay. I say it wrong. It's
Mm-hmm.
Lompoc. I'll get that right. So, tell me about that first day. I mean, you hadn't been in corrections before. You hadn't been, I'm assuming you hadn't been to jail very many times up to that point. So,
I had not.
What was it like walking in and hearing that door slam?
It was kind of intimidating. My first day, it just sucked, because I was the fresh meat. The inmates knew that, so they were talking back to me quite a bit, and you're unsure of what you can and cannot do. And
Sure.
the thing is, though, with corrections, once you get through that first day, each day gets easier once you develop a rapport with the inmates. All my communication skills I developed over my career comes from Lompoc, having to deal with maximum security inmates that, especially from the California area,
Yeah.
they didn't really appreciate adult supervision, so to speak. And so you had to be able to talk to those guys to be able to get them to do what you wanted to do.
Yeah. So in some ways, one thing I think we have in common is, I grew up in the Midwest also. And then when you go in, especially work in federal prison or moving around and going to the different areas, you're exposed to a whole different, different cultures, different, we don't have as big of gangs in the Ozarks,
Right.
in Iowa. So what was some of that like getting used to?
That was it. Culture shock, total culture shock. Uh, you know, my town of 550, was 550 white people.
Right.
So military. Obviously, I was around minorities and different cultures and stuff like that. But then when you get to prison, where you're dealing with East Coast, West Coast, we had a bunch of Jamaicans, we had Haitians, we had every ethnic group. I mean, the Mexican Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood.
Sure.
It was
Yeah,
an
and
absolute.
even with the different cultures now, I mean, especially when you get into those heavy gang cultures, that's something that was just foreign to me. I mean, there's a whole different thought
Yeah.
process than working, in the military or whatever with someone from a different culture. That's a gang culture out there. Their views on criminality, they have a different criminal moral set. So that kind of blew me away.
Yeah, it absolutely was an eye opener, and everything was so based on race out there. You
hmm
know, like say you were trying to release somebody out of segregation, you would call the housing unit and you'd literally ask them, "Do you have a white cell available? Do you have a black cell available? Do you have a Hispanic cell available?" And if you
Right.
didn't have a particular race to put the guy that you wanted to kick out of segregation, they stayed in segregation until an opening came up.
hmm
It was weird to me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was What was some of the things you saw out there? Anything that really still stands out in your mind? I mean, that's a big
Well,
penitentiary. It's been known as a violent one for a
yeah,
long time.
the violence was amazing. I remember in like the first 6 months of 1993, we had 6 homicides. You know,
Yeah.
I shouldn't say 6 homicides. There's probably 4 homicides and then 2 drug overdoses. But
Hmm.
6 dead inmates, and it was chaos. We lost our warden had transferred in. He'd been there like 9 months, and then suddenly he's gone again. And then when they bring in the cleaner, the big
Hmm.
boss warden, and he comes in and he, fixes everything. I shouldn't say fixes everything, but tries to. We got it running
Right.
operationally again. So, uh, yeah, some of the violence I saw, some of the violence towards me.
Mm.
Uh, I've been chased with shanks. I had a guy make a homemade zip gun, and he shot me. So uh,
Wow.
he actually made 3 of them. He hit me the first one. The second one uh, missed me, went right by my face, and then finally got away from him. So
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
participated in a lot of brawls.
I started at Leavenworth, and that was considered a big time penitentiary. But I can't imagine. We just had Adam Dennis on here. He worked California Department of Corrections for an entire career, and we talked about the fact that the West Coast is where a large portion of the gangs in the U.S. started. So,
Absolutely.
being in a federal penitentiary on the West Coast in California, I'm guessing that puts the level of violence you're dealing with at a whole new level.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the prison pretty much was ran by the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia, which they had a
Hmm.
truce. But we also, we're in California, and LA was 120 miles down the road. So we had a huge population of Crips and Bloods and, um, various street gangs,
Hmm.
Serenos and Norteños. Well, I guess we didn't have the Norteños in there, but the Serenos.
Right.
And it was just, we had some Texas Syndicate in there. The Texas
Wow.
Syndicate, those were some violent guys. I saw them during the middle of a main line. They were doing some internal discipline, and they had contracted out with the Guamanians. We had about a handful of Guamanians, and
Hmm.
they attacked one of the Texas Syndicate guys and stabbed him 67 times right in the middle of the corridor. They wanted everybody to see.
Right.
So
Yeah. So, what are you thinking the first couple of years? Is your brain going, well, this is a career, or are you starting to think, well, maybe I need to look another direction? I mean, what were your feelings overall for that career?
uh, overall, I am a Midwest boy through and
Hmm.
through. And my whole thing was I was trying to get back to the Midwest at any type of prison. I actually put in for a transfer to Leavenworth, you know,
Okay.
uh,
Yep.
not knowing how stuff worked. I was like, I wanted to go to Leavenworth and Rochester. And then at the time, they were opening up Pekin and Greenville. And
Hmm.
Pekin was the closest institution to Iowa. And I really, really wanted to go to Pekin, but my captain knew somebody that was going to Greenville. So I ended up transferring to Greenville after 2.5 years at Lompoc.
Okay.
Yep.
So, I've been to Greenville. That's quite a change.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Dramatic.
you,
Hmm.
I'm guessing you rested a little bit after that. Um,
I did.
Tell me.
Yeah. It was. It's kind of ironic though. I was involved in so much stuff at Lompoc, but my first large scale disturbance, where we lost the institution, was at Greenville.
Oh, you were there.
I was there absolutely that night.
That was the
The
crack
crack
law
law
riots.
riots.
Wow.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that for
October.
people that don't know.
Well, anyway, October 20th. I remember I was working October 19th. I was supposed to have the 20th and the 21st off.
Uh-huh.
And I was working it was a Thursday night. And like at 9:30 in the morning or 9:30 at night, I was working evenings. all the inmates were like running to the TV room, and I'm like, checking it out. And up on the CNN, they were showing. I can't remember what institution had gone up. There was like 6 or 7 that had gone up that Thursday because
Right.
they had overturned or they hadn't overturned the weight disparity between the cocaine and the crack cocaine. Basically, it
Right.
took like 100 grams of cocaine equaled like 1 ounce of crack cocaine. So it was
Right.
so
And
they were mad
cocaine
about
was
that.
considered cocaine at the time was considered more of a white drug, and crack was considered
Right.
more of a brown or black drug in the poorer areas. So there was a bunch of tension in the country at that time, and especially in the prisons because of that disparity.
Right. And so for the first time ever, we were going to lock down the institution. So they called in a bunch of us for overtime.
Mm-hmm.
I asked to work in the housing unit. I'd been working all quarter. And they're like, no, you need to go over to H4, which was the one next door. So I'm like, okay. Ironically, they kicked off in the prison or at the housing unit that I was working that night. So,
Right.
uh, I everybody in there got, I literally watched as like 6 or 7 staff members, ran out of the building, bloodied and bruised and, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm literally trapped in the other housing unit. We're trapped in the middle with the offices. We didn't have keys to the front door. Those were out on the compound. And then eventually, after they contained H3 was the one that went up on the A and the B side. They let us out. The disturbance control team was, activated. And I was going to go in with them, and I was going to have all the keys to the doors.
Okay.
So we get ready to go in after we negotiated them and, broke the window through the phone into them, and they gave up because, what are they going to do? They're trapped.
Right.
And so we pull them all out and we go in there, and there's no doors. They had broken every door in that housing unit. They'd stacked all the doors. They were wooden doors at the time, and they'd stacked them in the middle of the housing unit.
Now
it was
what?
like $1.8 million worth of damage. It was impressive. So
Yeah. And so you guys ended up having to put them on buses and send them other places, or how did you manage them with no doors on them?
then we worked till I worked till 6 o'clock the next morning, and all we did was the 4 p.m. count did not clear till like 4 a.m. So we moved inmates to the gymnasium, we moved inmates to food service, and then we started putting them in segregation. So we had a capacity of, I think it was 144, and we were running at like 40 at the time. And by 4 a.m., by the time I got off, we were at capacity 144. And then the buses started coming the next day, Leavenworth, Springfield, Marion.
And you've got how many years in at this point?
I had 3.5.
Wow.
And I was one of the veteran guys,
Wow.
because it was a brand new institution. So
do you think that had anything to do, or do you think it would have went off no matter who was working there?
No, it would have went off no matter who.
Okay. Yeah, because it was a national thing more than an institutional thing.
When they opened up Greenville, we're right outside of St. Louis, so we had a huge St. Louis population, and most of those guys had come from Memphis, so they all knew each other. It was a really tight compound as far as the inmates.
Interesting. So, still looking at this as a career after 3.5 years in?
Yeah, I absolutely was. That was the point where I decided that I wanted to be a lieutenant. I wanted to be in charge of a shift. I wanted to be the one running to the emergencies, taking charge of the emergencies. Yeah,
had you seen some good leadership? Was there some people that you were working with who, you looked up to?
I
you
have
said
seen
that's who
some
I
really
want to
good
be.
leadership and some really bad leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've seen some bad leadership too. There was like, if that guy can be a lieutenant, I can be a lieutenant.
Absolutely.
We had great lieutenants at Lompoc. Great, great guys. guys that you would, you literally went to battle with on a daily basis. And I got
Hmm.
to I got to Greenville, and we had, staff from all over the agency, and guys that had been, made lieutenant from a camp or a low, which hadn't dealt with penitentiary inmates or,
Right.
inmates misbehaving like on a riot scale. So,
Okay.
but
So
yeah, I thought if they can be a lieutenant, I can be a lieutenant. So
yeah. So now you're looking at being a lieutenant. So where are
I
you?
am.
What are you putting in for? Still
Well,
trying to get
I
closer
was
to
putting
home.
in once again. I was trying to make my 9 at Pekin. Pekin was my dream institution my whole career
Okay. Okay.
up until Thompson.
Okay.
I've always wanted to be a lieutenant or a captain or something at Thompson or at Pekin.
Uh-huh.
But I'm at Greenville, and uh, I get asked to go to Milan to make my 9 at Milan. Well, I wasn't going to turn down a promotion. If you're specifically asking for me, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go. You
Sure.
know, and they were like, give us 2 years and we'll get you where you want to go. And I'm like, okay, I can absolutely do that. So
Mm-hmm.
I went up to Milan, and brand new 9 lieutenant. I'm living on the reservation. It's a low, and I'm absolutely miserable.
Right. Not much going on.
No, nothing was going on. It was, literally just fighting inmates every day about, do rags and, illegal hats and stealing out of the food service. That's all it was.
Right.
There was no violence, minimal drug issues. There was a lot of dirty staff bringing stuff into the inmates.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah,
Because was there a lot of work release up there? Am I right about that? Or a lot of them working outside the institution?
we had yeah, we had the same inmates that I was yelling to take their hat off in the chow hall. They would be outside, fixing my air conditioners, or if I had a leaking sink in my house, they would be the ones,
Right.
So it was different. It was awkward. So I
What's it
remember
like?
my son. He was out. It was in the fall, and the leaves were falling, and he's out in our side yard playing football.
Mm-hmm.
And I go out there, and he's like throwing. It was like this. It was like a duct taped tube, plastic tube, and he's like
Mm-hmm.
throwing it around. And I'm like, what you got there? And he gives it to me, and it turned out it was marijuana that they were trying to introduce into the into the institution.
Yeah.
And it was a huge amount of marijuana, man. I mean,
Wow. Yeah,
but
that's something I've
yeah,
never
at
done
that
is
point, it was like I need to leave. I need to leave Milan. You know.
yeah. That's something I've never done is live on the
So
reservation for the people that don't know early on in the especially the Bureau of Prisons. Um, it was common for them to build housing. Usually, the warden was always going to live on the reservation. A lot of times, an AW, an associate warden, or a captain would be required to, and then there would be different levels of hopefully, some lieutenants or something like that, and then
yep,
officers who lived on the reservation. Usually, those houses were built and maintained by the inmates, and they paid a subsidy for rent. But the reason was, we're talking, you got to think back 1930s, 1940s, you didn't just have cell phones. It wasn't as easy to get a hold of everybody. So having people that lived right there at the institutions was always considered a plus. And some of that still exists in the Bureau of Prisons for those that don't understand that. I've never lived on the reservation, but what's that like never getting away from work?
it's a grind. Yeah, you want to get away and you can't. But I mean, also, I knew as a 9 lieutenant that I was only going to be there for a year or two. Because
Mm,
at that time, basically, once you made your 9, you're at 11 within 2 years, and generally it was
right.
always at another spot. So I was just like, okay, all I got to do is suck it up. Okay, yeah, I decided to time to get out of Milan. So I was putting in for my 11, and immediately both Marion and Rochester were interested. Marion was moving in 3 lieutenants. However, I don't know if you remember, but they used to have 3 moves a year. So they had already used one of them. So I was going to be the third guy. I was going to be the first guy picked up after the fiscal year, so after October. But then Rochester, they still had move money, so they picked me up.
So tell me about working at Rochester.
Well, Rochester was a prison hospital, so that was another thing that was totally foreign to me. Corrections custody was not running stuff there. Medical was. Psychology was. We were just like, keeping the chains moving, so to speak. But, there'd be times where you'd lock an inmate up, and then within an hour, the psychologist, psychiatrist would let them out. So, because they're not responsible for their behavior because, of their mental health, or they have Alzheimer's,
Sure.
It was an eye-opening experience. There was no gang issues there, which was cool. I mean, the vast majority of the inmates were low security, and the max custody guys that we had, and even the out custody guys that we had, they were really sick. I mean, we were like the end stage liver disease. That's where they sent all those guys that had destroyed livers, because we were right outside the Mayo Clinic, in Rochester. That's where the inmates went.
Yeah, working at Fed Med, I saw a lot of the same. Working at Fed Med, I saw a lot of the same thing. Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, is kind of considered downtime for guys. I mean, even if they were pretty big hitters in gangs and stuff, everybody was trying to get healed up or trying to get healthy, so they kind of called a truce, and we didn't have those type of problems. But we had plenty of other problems like you were talking about. How much mental health does Rochester have up there?
We had an entire building of mental health. I think there was probably 180 inmates between the 2 floors. And then we had the seclusion unit, which is basically the segregation for the mental health guys. Yeah.
That's when your communication skills came to bear, didn't they?
Yes, exactly. It's kind of tough talking to a guy, who's convinced that the CIA is in the walls, and please, Lieutenant Hansen, make them shut up. Okay, I'll do it. Thank you.
And it's a fine line because like you said, I've walked in a cell with a mop because a guy thought his walls were bleeding, and I'll mop the wall, and then he's fine. But the next time you do something like that, you might be playing too far into his mental health problem, and he'll go off on you. And so it's tough to know what the right thing to do is, especially with those guys.
Yeah, so we had one inmate that... Okay, go ahead.
At what point did you start thinking about investigations? When did that start interesting you?
To be honest, that when I was at Greenville, I spent 6 months as the phone monitor, and I got the bug then. I was always interested there, but then as a lieutenant, you got to learn how to be a supervisor. So it kind of got pushed to the background. And and of course, being the SIS lieutenant, especially at Rochester where we had an SIA, it was a matter of seniority. I had to do your time up, working SR1, working, swings and mids and all that stuff. So eventually I got into the SIS shop. And I loved the investigations. I mean, that was right up my alley, It's cool knowing everything that's going on in an institution. What the inmates are doing, what the staffs are doing on some levels, who's who's shoplifting, who's beating their wife, who's getting drunk downtown, what inmate has issues with another inmate, what staff members are dirty, bring or looked at bringing stuff in. So
Right.
yeah, I really truly enjoyed it.
Tell me if I've got this right. At the Federal Medical Center, I noticed, like we talked about, they kind of, it's kind of a truce area. They're kind of laid down. They're trying to heal up. And it's not necessarily that inmates would snitch, but it was a lot more comfortable arena to have discussions with inmates. And you could learn stuff, even outside of your institution, that you wouldn't learn at a full blown penitentiary. Was it kind of like that at Rochester?
Absolutely. What was weird for me was like, having like the nurses around who generally cared about the inmates, cared about
Mm-hmm.
their health, because you didn't have that at the penitentiary level,
Mm-hmm.
You didn't even have that at the medium level or the low level, but this was all about like the mentally ill guys, trying to get them to function. This was all about, this guy has prostate cancer, let's get him healthy. And
Mm-hmm.
so the inmates were a lot different too. It wasn't so us versus them. It was more. It was a much more relaxed area. You could talk to them. You could reason with them. I mean, well, except for the mental health guys, but yeah, it's a very easy area to cultivate snitches. Very, very easy.
Right. Yeah.
Because
So what was
it
some of
was
the?
easy time there,
Mm-hmm.
and the inmates, had been at the higher security levels and know about the wars and the gang problems and all that stuff, and they didn't want to go back. So if somebody was trying to do that in Rochester, they would snitch them off. So
Right.
because they didn't
Well,
want their easy life to be interrupted.
so one of the things that I guess, and it still gets to me, I still talk about it when I train correctional staff, um, working in the SIS shop, the thing that always got me the worst is you become intimately knowledgeable about dirty staff and how that happens and how staff manipulation happens and the amount of it that goes on. Talk to me about some of what you saw, because you were in there a long time in investigations.
Yeah. For Rochester, I mean, a lot of it was um, we had a lot of female staff would run off with the inmates, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And generally it was, the inmates would identify them, see that they had low self-esteem. Uh, the staff members would be bitching, complaining about their significant other, and they would hear stuff, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you don't even think that the inmates in there, but you don't think he's listening because he's like working, he's cleaning, whatever, but they're picking up everything.
Sure.
So they would take runs at him, and eventually, they just wear him down. So we had one staff member, she didn't even make it to Glencoe before she was tied up with an inmate.
Wow.
And as somebody that had taught her IF class, I was offended. I was like, because she came back, was like, oh, I didn't know. She tried to break up with the inmate. I was like, oh, I didn't know that was the wrong thing to do. Like, yes, you did know it was the wrong thing to do. We beat you over the head with that in training.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's all, I mean, there's always something else going on in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Husbands being mean, boyfriends being mean, and then this person is, waiting on, can't wait to see them and telling them how good they look and, how smart and pretty they are, stuff like that. Stuff they're not getting at home, they're getting from the inmate. And they just, they just don't see it as manipulation. And then next thing you know, you're bringing stuff in, and sometimes it leads to even more than that.
Sure. I guess the hardest thing for me to get used to going from penitentiaries to the medical center was that familiarity. And it's caused, just like you said, there's nurses that care. There's psychologists that care, psychiatrists that care. They have to do their job with a level of empathy. And that automatically puts them in a position to where I guess the line is not as wide there. as it is for maybe a correctional officer who's always got that arm length distance.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I saw a lot of that. And it was disappointing.
Yeah, I know. A big shock to me was I was probably 3, 4 years in at my Rochester. I spent 12 years in Rochester,
Okay.
and we had an inmate who had been on suicide watch for years, literally years.
Mm.
And the nurses had worked with him so hard, and the psychologists had worked with him, and the psychiatrists. And he's on suicide watch. He's on suicide watch. And then finally, they let him off suicide watch, and within a week, he killed himself. And the
Wow.
nurses were just, they were crying, and I was like, that was just unbelievable to me, But
Right.
then looking at it on a human level, I get it. They were invested. They thought they had gotten him cured to where he didn't want to hurt himself, and then he hurt himself.
Sure. Yeah. Tough. Um, so what are, I mean, we talked about, manipulation and stuff. Did you have any other, I guess, memorable, cases and stuff that you worked on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we had a nursing assistant that um, she literally got caught having sex by another staff member with an inmate. They worked 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. At like 7 o'clock, the charge nurse was like looking for her. She was a nursing assistant. So she goes looking for her, and she goes into it was like a shower
Nope.
area, and the lights are off, and the curtain is drawn. She turns on the light, pulls back the curtain, and there they are having sex. So,
Wow.
and then, of course, I came in at midnight that night, and that's all what the whole institution was talking about was that,
Hmm.
you know. So,
And it affects the whole
uh,
institution when things like that happen, doesn't it?
yeah. Well, the inmate, he was like, I didn't do anything wrong, because we're putting him in the hole, and he wasn't going to go to the hole. And he's a big dude, man. He was well over 300 pounds.
Hmm.
And he's like, I'm not going to the hole. And like, yes, you are. So he refused to cuff up. So we had to use force on him. And we ended up dislocating his shoulder right in front of her, And
Wow.
she's like looking at, like, oh my God, you're hurting my lover type of stuff. So it was a weird night.
What a mess.
Yeah.
So
So,
you're at Rochester for 12 years. What's your
yep.
next step?
My next step was they opened up AUSP Thompson.
Well, that's where we met.
And that's exactly where we met. So I would have retired out of Rochester, except they opened up Thompson, which was literally 2 hours from where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And I lateraled down there as the special investigative agent. So, and then, as you know, there we had all the trials and tribulations of just trying to get our, maximum security inmates.
Sure.
So that took what,
Well,
3, 4 years?
yeah. And I haven't talked about it much. Thompson was a prison that the state of Illinois built in 1999 and never funded it to open. So it never held more than just a few camp inmates. And then in 2014, I think,
Yep.
the state of Illinois gave it to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And so that seemed like a really great idea at the time. Um, we thought we were just going to go in there and open up this prison, but the prison wasn't built up to the Federal Bureau of Prison standards. So a lot of us spent a lot of time learning about contracting and uh, uh, building new fences
Yeah.
and how far
Yeah. Because it was
digital.
wired for dial up internet.
Right.
Yeah.
um, it was phone lines. They didn't have stuff for computers and printers and scanners and all the stuff we use
Yeah.
today. So it was quite a job getting that up and going. And
Mm-hmm.
but once we got it going, it was running good. When I rolled out of there, I know it's had some problems since, but we did have a really good crew of people working there at Thompson when we opened it up, and I learned a lot from a lot of the other people. Uh, I was captain there, so I had to lean on some people in order to understand my new role in leadership. And you were definitely a part of that because you had been working in investigations and had been in leadership for so long. I mean, how long were you a lieutenant or a lieutenant? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a supervisor for 20 years total, 12
Yeah,
years as a lieutenant, and 8 years as the SIA.
absolutely.
So, yeah.
So, and then, so you stayed at Thompson. You were there when I left. Um, when did you retire?
I retired July 31st of 2019.
2019. Okay.
Yep.
And so I know you've been doing stuff since then. Tell me a little bit about what you've done because I know a lot of people think retirement.
Well, I mean, I
If you,
absolutely love my job. I had
hmm
no intention of retiring. And then I get a message from on LinkedIn from a headhunter that was looking. He was looking for prison people with top secret clearances. I just happened to have a top secret clearance because you might recall my audit guidelines said that the SIA had to be part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
yep,
So
yep,
I was a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force out of Chicago, which required a top secret. So that's why I had it.
yeah,
And, initially he's like, do you want to go to Afghanistan? And I'm like, no, I don't want to go to Afghanistan. But tell me, how much does it pay? And then he told me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm interested in going to
yeah.
Afghanistan. Yeah.
So what did they want you to? I mean, you're working contract for a company there. What did they want you for? What did you do?
They basically were a part of a task force, and I was going to be the subject matter expert on prison investigations and prison gangs.
Hmm.
So I flew to Bagram Air Base. Once I went through all my training, and it was pretty much like being in the military again. I had to qualify on the M4 and like the military course of fire.
Wow.
We were concealed carry M11s. Which I'm
Uh,
like, I cannot believe we were concealed carry inside of a prison, but we
yeah.
were. And yeah, so I had my counterpart, and we would meet outside the prison, and we'd
Hmm.
go over what he was working on, and they were almost all like green on blue type of stuff, where the workers at the prison were tied up with the Taliban outside, and they were worried about there's going to be an attack on the staff.
Right.
Um, so at one point, we didn't even go out to the prison because it was so dangerous. So,
And so
but
you're
I mean,
doing
the
investigations.
Taliban, they don't really have. At least when I got there, they were starting to develop them when I got there or when I left. They didn't have like prison gangs because
Uh,
they're all Taliban, you know. So
interesting.
it's more of a religious type thing for them. They were all enemy combatants and stuff like that.
Hmm.
It was very, very confusing trying to figure out who was in the prison because, over in Afghanistan, they only have like one name. So you might have, we had 5,500 inmates inside the prison,
Wow.
but there might have been 1,000 Muhammads, you know,
Yeah.
and which one's Muhammad, the head Taliban that, responsible for murdering 10 people, or what was the Muhammad, the dirt farmer that got pulled off the battlefield? And, it was very confusing. And that's what we spent most of our time trying to figure out who was who.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And
Oh, it was probably the most rewarding time of my career. I mean, you literally thought that you were bringing peace to the Middle East, trying to figure out who was who, and they were using our information uh, for like the negotiations to draw down out of there. Not that it ended up working out that way.
hmm
Obviously, we had issues with the pullout of Afghanistan. I won't get into that,
yeah.
but yeah.
So,
But yeah, I
wh-
mean, it was we had it was the task force was led by the Colonel Bergman, great guy, West Point grad, smartest man I've ever met in my life. He knew something about everything, and he kept us on point. And this is our mission, and he was really easy to work with, but he was also
right.
very tough on his army officers. So he treated me great. I loved it there. Perhaps I would have stayed over there for as long as the war lasted, but then
Yeah.
COVID cut us down.
Oh, yeah.
So,
That is so cool,
yeah,
brother. Um,
yeah,
so I can understand that with, you know, a group of inmates that have this one religious, um, in connection. So food's going to probably be a little different. Prayer times, with it being a Muslim religion. But
yep.
looking from overall, and you had 20 plus years in United States prisons, and then now you're looking at these prisons. What's the difference in the inmates? What were the big differences you saw, other than, I mean, the fact they're not all broke up into different gangs?
Well, I mean, it was strange the way they ran the prison. The guards didn't like work in the housing unit with them. They were like
Uh,
up top with the catwalks. There was like catwalks above,
okay.
and they'd be like peering down into their living quarters. And I mean, they would go in there for the food, but the food was they literally would like wheelbarrow like rice. I mean, it was a straight real wheelbarrow. And then they
Uh,
would like, they'd come up with their plates and they'd put the rice on there. There'd be some type of protein, whether chicken or beef or whatever, never
uh-huh.
pork.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you know, they going through their food service. We had put an American style kitchen in there. Well, they couldn't figure it out or didn't want to figure it out, so they like tore everything out, and they were like cauldrons, like witches' cauldrons, and they would boil
Mhm.
all their rice and all their protein in the thing, and then pour it in those wheelbarrows to wheel down to the housing units.
And
But
the
I
officers
mean,
in
it
here,
was
they're locals? Are these local officers, or is it a
military.
mix of? Okay, it's all
No, they
military?
were
Okay.
all military. But I mean, those guys were all related on some level, you know.
Mhm.
So
It sounds kind of like the South American prisons. They don't go into the prison. The guards watch the walls.
yeah,
It's not so much walking a housing unit. So when you were doing investigations, you weren't going in there and walking through a housing unit and talking to people. They were getting pulled
no,
out to you. Okay.
right. Well, to be honest, I never talked to an inmate there. That was
Oh,
the responsibility of my counter, my cohort, basically, my Afghan guy that was doing my job. Basically,
sure.
I met with him, and he was the one doing the interviewing, and I would be telling him, this is the questions you should ask. This is what we're trying
Ah.
to find out, type of stuff like that.
So
So,
you were the investigation specialist, and he's doing some of the information gathering.
right,
But okay,
yeah, I'm basically there to help him. If
wow,
he has questions. But I mean, they had so many other issues. I mean, they didn't even have printer cartridges to where they could print off count sheets or any of that stuff, or to print off their investigations. I
yeah,
mean, it was
just totally
it,
foreign.
it was
I guess in a
yeah, yeah, yeah,
wow. Well, that's just so cool. That I mean, um, your career has taken you from uh, miling to the lowest, all the way to seeing some of that stuff. That is just
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
I'm blessed, man. I'm absolutely blessed.
that's cool. Um,
Yeah.
So let me ask you this one question. I like to ask people who were leaders a long time because, I get emails from different people, new officers and stuff on here, and they're talking about, leadership. Give me a couple of, the highlights of you've led people for a long time. And I watched you lead people, a
Mm.
great crew over in Thompson, in your office over there. What's some of the leadership things that mean the most to you that you think matter the most for people who are moving into those positions?
Uh, I mean, communication, just being able to listen to people, what they're saying and what they're meaning are like two different things sometimes. That
Yeah.
that crew at Thompson that I got to select,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was so proud of that team. Uh, the leaders that I developed out of that, uh, you I got one for sure. That's she's high up in the Bureau investigative thing now. She's in D.C.
Yeah.
Other people, absolutely. could do that way if they were mobile and wanted to move.
Sure.
I was so proud of them, taking what I taught them and then moving on, and they've exceeded my career. That just made me so proud, so proud.
Nice.
And I would tell them, that this right here, we're stressed, we're brand new. You're going to look back and this is going to be the favorite part of your career, because this is where you're learning everything for when you achieve what you want to achieve in this career. This is where you learned your basics. Because at Lompoc, I always used to say, I'll never, ever regret leaving Lompoc, and I'll never, ever regret working there, because that's where I learned everything that made me successful the rest of my career. So,
yeah. Well, that's I can't tell you how much I enjoy listening to your stories. Of course, we've talked a lot in the past too. It's so good to hear from you, and I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this conversation that we had today. I know you're still working overseas and doing that kind of stuff.
I am. Yeah. Basically, when the war ended, all the prison contractor jobs dried up, and I fell into security for embassies that they're building. So basically what I do now is my company that I work for, we have like 10 different projects where they're building embassies and consulates around the world. And I go and I work security at the construction sites.
Nice.
So currently I'm in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I just got done with a year in Podgorica, Montenegro, which was awesome tour. Before that was Athens, Greece, and before that was Honduras.
Yeah. Wow. I talk to people and they say I'm going to retire, but I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get a job, at the local Walmart or something. And there are so many options for corrections when you retire. I think that's another reason I wanted you on here, was just to show people, don't limit yourself. When you retire, you've learned skills over your career that everybody wants.
Absolutely.
And I think you're an example of that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate
Absolutely. Hey, before we go, I'd like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. Omni Real-Time Locating System is a company I've been working closely with for years. I'm proud to be a part of this innovative team that's developed the best real-time locating system on the market today for your jail or prison. Omni's PREA-compliant real-time monitoring technology is the very best way to track and record your inmates' locations, their movements, their interactions throughout every square inch of your correctional facility. Imagine getting an alarm the second an escape happens, or an alert that lets you know when an inmate's heart rate drops below a set level. To learn more about Omni, go to www.omnirtls.com. That's omnirtls.com. Or you can click on today's show notes to get in the information guide. Omni Real-Time Locating System is a powerful tool specifically designed for the modern correctional professional. If you haven't done so, please take a moment to like my podcast, or better yet, hit the subscribe button so that you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. Thanks for listening, and let's be safe out there.